So last week, we kicked off this Crazy Like Us series. And if you were with us last week, one of the things that we said is look, we're going to spend the next couple of weeks teaching you how to be generous. And that's different than giving. There's a big difference between generosity and giving. Often giving is spontaneous, where generosity is planned. There's sort of some thought to it. It's a development of a lifestyle. It's a part of who we are. It's something that we are instead of giving, which is often something that we do. And one of the things that we said is look, we're going to give you a definition of what generosity is, and it will kind of be the working definition that we have throughout this series. And so this was the definition that we shared with you guys last week. We said this is what generosity is. Generosity is the premeditated, calculated, designated liberation of personal financial assets. Now, that's a bit wordy, so I'm just going to take a brief second to unpack it if you weren't here with us last week. It's premeditated in the sense that we've thought through this, we've planned ahead, that there's some rationale, there's some strategic thinking to what our generosity looks like. It's calculated, that we've set aside an amount, like we've figured out what that amount is, and then we designate it, we target it towards some cause, something that we believe in, and then we just set it free. We liberate our resources, and when we let go of our money loses control over us. And so that's really, we're going to continue to unpack that, continue to talk about the concept of generosity. And the fact that so many of us give times to certain things often gives us the perception that we're generous. But the truth is, as we unpack this, we realize we're not. And we want you to be generous, not because of what we get out of it, but we believe that your life would be different, that you would be better if you were fueled with generosity, because this is the promise of generosity. This is what generosity promises everyone. When you become generous, when that's how you order your life, when you become generous, you will give more, save more, and consume less. And again, we touched on this last week, but all of us have causes, things that we believe in, things that we love, that we just wish there was a little bit more money that we could give to those things. Well, if we're generous, the promise is there will be. Not only will there be more money to give away, but there'll be more money that we save, that we create for us some stability, some financial resources and reserves, so that when life happens, we're prepared for those. And ultimately, we will consume less. Now, if you weren't with us last week, I want to make sure I make this disclaimer, and I'm going to make it every single week, because you're probably thinking, great, I came to church this morning, and I came during a giving series. I picked the worst time to be here. So let me just say this. I want you to understand very clearly that I don't want anything from you. I want something for you. This whole series isn't about getting you to give your money to Lake Sawyer. I don't want you to give out of ought to. I want you to be generous because you want to. And if that's here, great, awesome. If it's somewhere else, great, awesome. I don't want something from you. I want something for you. See, the reason many of us Americans feel financial pressure, the reason many of us feel like we're struggling, like every day we're trying to keep ahead, every day we're trying just to keep up, the reason why we feel these financial pressures is because no one really ever taught us what it means to be generous. No one taught us how to orient our lives around that principle. And I'm sure at this point, someone would disagree with me and they say, well, no, I'm not generous because I don't make enough money. That if I made enough money, then I would be generous. But if that's what you're thinking, let me just ask you to stop for a second. Just pause and embrace this reality. Someone somewhere else in the world today would look at the money that you make, would look at the money that I make, would look at the resources that we have available, and they would wonder to themselves, why is it that we feel all the financial pressures that we feel? They look at us and they think, they're crazy. Because if I had that much money, then I would be secure. And we're looking at it thinking, I don't have enough money. And they're right. They're right, because it is crazy. The whole way that we go about our finances in this country is crazy. And so we're going to spend just some time together unpacking this reality. We're going to call it the Great American Insanity Cycle. And again, it's crazy. So let's just humor me for a second as we walk through this. This is how so many of us approach life. It starts off with worry. We all worry, all of us. We worry about different things. We worry about some of the same things. We worry about our kids. We worry about our job. We worry about our financial security. We worry, just fill in the blank. I'm sure if I say, what do you worry about? Something immediately probably comes to mind of what you worry about. Many of us, we worry about our finances. That's kind of a common thing that a lot of us share. Now, worry's one thing, but here's what we do in America when it comes to our finances. We go from worry to the second thing is we go out and we spend more than we make. That's our response. I wonder if I have enough resources. I wonder if I have enough money available to help me through this season, to help me through this reality. I don't know. I'm full of worry. So here's my response. I will go spend more than I make. Now let me just say this. If this is true of you, I'm not trying to beat you up. The truth is, it's probably been true of all of us. Seasons of my life, this is absolutely my reality. And I get better, and I go through seasons where I rein in some of my spending, and then I fall back into this. So again, I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to all of us. Because this is part of what our system, what our world is driven by. So we worry, we spend more than we make, and then ultimately what happens when we spend more than we make is we go into debt, which that makes sense. That's simple math. We understand that. We go into debt, and now we're figuring, like, I got all these bills to pay, but there's more stuff I want, and I got to pay off last month's desires, last month's wants, and we're struggling with our debt. And then ultimately that debt leads to this truth, that we have no margin. There's none. There's nothing left over. There's nothing extra, and that freaks us out. It freaks us out because, again, life happens, bad things happen, and when that does, what are we going to be able to do in response to that? If there is no margin, the truth is, there's nothing we can't do. And so, we worry. And we worry, and then we go out, and we continue to do the same crazy thing. We spend more than we make, which leads to increased debt, which leads to less margin, which leads to worry, and then the cycle continues. It just goes on. So let's unpack this a little bit more. What is it that we are constantly worried about? The truth is, one of the things we're worried about is this. We're worried about future consumption. Will I be able to consume at the same level I currently am consuming at? We have a phrase related to this in our world today, our country. We say it's keeping up with the Joneses. Can I consume at the same level to put forth this perception that my life is all put together, that I have the nice house, that I have the good cars, that I have everything that everyone else that I'm associated with has? Can I continue to consume at the same level that I am now? And when we don't, when some of the pressures and reality come to that, our worry only increases. And so when we worry about future consumption, then ultimately what we do is we consume more than we can afford. We just keep consuming. And again, this is part of my reality. Just keep consuming. And then this leads to not just debt, but consumer debt. There's debt in our world today that we seem to say is like, this is reasonable debt. Like it's reasonable for you to have a home mortgage. Some people say it's reasonable for you to pay off student loans. Some say it's reasonable for you to finance a car. Some people say, no, you shouldn't do any of that. But generally kind of we accept the fact that those are areas in life that it's reasonable to have debt. But when it comes to consumer debt, this is our credit card debt. These are the things that we're literally paying off, small things, sometimes bigger things. But every month we're paying more for things that depreciate in value. And at the same time, we're paying outrageous interest rates on the things that we have bought. because we're consuming more than we can afford, because we worry about our levels of consumption. Can we keep it up? And so ultimately, when you're racking up consumer debt, what happens is you get to a point where you have no margin for future consumption. And again, the cycle continues because we got to keep going. We got to keep up with the Joneses. We have to stay on this train. And maybe you're thinking, well, Mike, here's the thing. I just don't make enough money. That if I made just double the income now, if I made double the income that I currently make, then I wouldn't have this issue, because the truth is I wouldn't be spending more than I make because I would be making a lot more. But the reality is, and I need you to hear this, there is no correlation between the amount of money and what you spend. What we're dealing with here is simply a self-control issue. We don't have self-control. And so we continue to consume more than we can afford. Maybe you're thinking, okay, well, Mike, hold on. You said double the income. Double the income. If I literally had triple the income, if I made 3 times more money than I make now, then I would be so rich. I'd have all this resources. I wouldn't have this problem. But again, there's no correlation between the two. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You will still deal with this, because ultimately what it is this is a contentment issue. That we don't find ourselves content. That we constantly desire more. You're like, okay, well, hold on. 4 times. If I had 4 times the income that I have now, then all of my worries, all of my financial pressures, everything will be taken care of. At that point, I'll have nothing left to worry about. But the truth is, you still will worry. You will still be on this cycle, because there is no correlation. You get the trend here, the theme? There is no correlation between these two things. What you're dealing with ultimately here is a discipline issue. We don't have the discipline. We can't seem to control ourselves. And so we spend, and then we want more because we're not content. And then there's no margin, and there's also no discipline. And maybe you're like, yeah, but like if I had like Bill Gates money, Jeff Bezos money, like if I had that kind of money, then I would have no worry. That if I just had enough resources, then I would have no worry. But the truth is, you will. Because there is no correlation between money and worry. What we're dealing with here is a spiritual issue. This is a spiritual problem. When we choose to worry, ultimately what we're choosing is to take that thing, to take whatever it is we're worrying about away from God and trying to carry the load ourselves. And we will always worry about things, financial and others, as long as we're trying to carry that load, instead of giving that over to God. This is what Paul writes in 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 17. He said, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." What Paul is saying here is saying, look, those of you who are rich in this world, I said this last week, if you make over $32,000 a year, you're in the top 1% of global wage earners. We are rich. In this present world, all of us are rich. And what Paul is challenging the church here is he's saying, look, don't place your trust in your wealth. Don't believe it's your wealth that will provide for you, but instead place your trust in God, because He is the source of all of our enjoyment, of all of life, that He is the one who eradicates our worry. Now that cycle that we just talked about, that cycle, that crazy cycle, it's an appetite. And you know this. The more you feed an appetite, the hungrier it gets. The more it demands out of you. And the more that you feel like we need to go get, and then the more debt we rack up, and then the less margin we have, and the more worry we experience, and we just continue to go down this cycle. And this appetite, it only grows. Here's a summary. More money does not generate more self-control. It does not generate more discipline, nor does it generate more contentment. More money does not eradicate worry. More money does not eradicate worry. There is no way for this cycle to take care of our worry. Now, maybe some of you are thinking, well, hold on a second. Like, yeah, maybe you're a little uncomfortable with some of the things I'm saying. You're thinking, well, I have an obligation. I have an obligation for the sake of the American economy to continue down this cycle, because, I mean, we have a service-driven economy, and if I hop off this crazy train, then the economy's going to fall, and, like, I don't really want to see that, and so I'm going to continue to commit, because America, we need to have a strong economy, and so I'm going to continue down this crazy cycle. But just hear me for a second. Let's just assume all of us on this weekend, every single one of us decided that we were no longer okay with the cycle. That would be like a pastor's dream, that he says something and then everyone does what he says. So let's just assume Mike's dreams come true. That every single one of you say, you know what, no more. I'm not going to be on this cycle anymore. Here's the reality. That still leaves over 325 million Americans on this crazy cycle. We'll be fine. It will be fine. You don't have to be a slave to this. You don't have to be committed to something that is crazy, something that is insane. See, this cycle is driven by a word that we don't like. A word that we never like when it's associated with us. This is what Jesus would call this cycle. He'd say it's greed. This insanity cycle is driven by greed. It's driven by the assumption that everything in our life is there for us to consume. It's ours. It's ours for the taking, and it's all about feeding this appetite. I'm going to say this, and I want to make sure you hear this. I might say it like 7 times. Most of our financial angst, it does not come from wanting something we cannot get. I'm going to say that wrong. I want to say that right. Most financial angst is the result of wanting what we cannot get, not needing what we don't have. Most of our financial angst comes from wanting what we can't get, not needing what we don't have. That our angst is driven by our approach to stuff, both the stuff we have and the stuff that we want. And Jesus would tell a parable about this. He would tell a story about a man and his approach to his stuff. That parable is found in Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 16. And we're going to spend the rest of our kind of time together unpacking this parable. And it might be a story that is familiar to a lot of you, but it's a great story that helps us see through Jesus' lens how we are to go about approaching our stuff. This is where we read beginning in verse 16. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So here's what we know from the get-go. The man is rich. He's got a lot of money. He's got a lot of wealth. He's got a lot of grain. He's got a lot of things that people in the ancient world would want. The dude is rich. And this year, his harvest is abundant. He's gotten more than he ever expected. The rich get richer. And so he thought to himself, He thought to himself, what shall I do? What shall I do with all of this grain that I have, with all of this harvest that I've taken in? What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Literally, translation, I've ran out of a place to store all of my wealth. So he says, this is what I will do. This is what I'll do. I got a bright idea. I'll do the same thing that I always do. Same thing. I'm rich. I get this. I know how this works. I get in abundance. I figure out a way to store it. I get in abundance. I figure out a way to store it. This now, I'll figure out a way to store it. This is what I will do. Next verse. I will tear down my barns, and I will build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. I will tear down my barns. I will make something bigger to store all of the grain that I have from this season. Now, this is not a bad idea. This is not a bad idea. This is not a bad idea if this was all that there was to the story. He's planning ahead. He's being smart with his money. He's thinking, store it now, consume it later. Hoard it now, dispose of it later. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain, you've got plenty of stuff laid up for many years. Many years. So take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. You see, this is a good plan. This would be a great plan if you knew how many years you had. But the truth is, he doesn't. And if the story was to end, we would look at this man and think, he's a role model. He's someone who understands how to use and how to conserve his resources. But the truth is, this is not where the story ends, because God said to him, you fool. God says, you fool. Not because you're rich. You're a fool because you are greedy. That this very night, tonight, your life will be demanded from you. Literally, you have ran out of time before you've run out of money. Then, Jesus, he asks great questions. Jesus says, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Who will get it? Not because you were generous. That ship sailed. Who will get this wealth? Who will get these resources? Not because you're generous, but because you're dead. This is how it will be for whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. It's a total loss. It will all be taken away. You can't take it with you. What I love so much about this story is that Jesus destroys our notion of ownership by appealing to our common sense. This is literally his point. If it can be taken away, from you, then the truth is, you never owned it anyway. A little over 2 years ago, my father-in-law kind of unexpectedly passed away on his 62nd birthday. It was a shock to us as a family. It was we had no signs that it was coming. And it was a difficult time. So we kind of processed through his loss as we went and kind of got through everything, when it comes to the memorial service, the celebration of life, all of that stuff. It was a really, really difficult time for us as a family. And we just kind of got through that season. My wife, some of her family's kind of scattered across the United States, and so everyone gathered together. We got through that period, and then we kind of went back to life and tried to just get through it. And about a year went by, and there was an opportunity for us to kind of come back together to begin to go through some of my father-in-law's stuff. We didn't get to that the first time around. And my father-in-law is the quintessential handyman. Like, the dude could fix anything. Like, washers, dryers, refrigerators, air conditioners, cars. He would just do it all. And when you can fix anything and you like that kind of stuff, you have to have a tool for every single thing that you work on. And so, like, my father-in-law, he had like a garage full of tools. He was an industrial air conditioning mechanic, and like he had a truck full of tools. Like, he would just get out of his truck and tools would fall out because like tools were everywhere. But the thing is, he wasn't just a handyman. My father-in-law, he loved to fish. That was his favorite hobby. And so he had all the things you need when you go fishing. He had a boat. He had the fish finder, call it the fish cheater. And he had the rods and the reels and just, again, everything, tackle, lure. Like, if you come along, he'd be like, 10 people, I got it all. I have all the equipment that you need. But he's also a tech nerd. So he had like drones and video game systems and computers and just all the stuff, GPS, all of it. And when we got back together and we started to sort through, if you will, his life, I was struck by how sobering this moment was. Because as we went through his things, there were all of these pieces, all of these items that meant the world to him. But now with him gone, the truth is, it had little value to us. That a lot of the stuff we gave away. Very few items we kept for ourselves. Most of it got thrown away. Because when you got a 5-year-old computer, it's like 4 years obsolete. And if you've ever lost someone, you've experienced the same thing. You've experienced the reality that these are the things that we pursue in life, but when it comes to the end of our lives, many of these things have little to no value. And that's why Jesus tells this story. And this is Jesus' point. He says, look, since it's all going to be taken away, you can't take it with you. It's all going to be taken away. Why would you miss the opportunity to give it away? Why would you miss the opportunity to bless someone else with the blessing that God has given you? See, generous people get this. They understand it. They understand that the things that they have in life, that they are managers of those things. They are managers of those resources, that it's not there for them to consume. And as long as you have this approach of ownership, the reality is you will be possessed by your possessions, that they will be the things that control you. And you have to be willing to let go, because until you can let go of your desire to consume, unless you can let go of your desire to hold on to your possessions, you will never be able to get off this crazy cycle. And you'll never be able to experience the hope, the life of generosity. So as I wrap up this morning, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. I want you to think about 2 things this week. The first of them is this. Start thinking about your stuff critically. Most of us have never done that. But I want you to start thinking about your stuff critically. Literally look at your stuff and ask, whatever it is, look at the couch and say, am I an owner or a manager? Look at the TV, am I an owner or am I a manager? Look at like a wood splitter. Someone had a wood splitter around here. That's pretty cool. Look at the wood splitter. Am I an owner or a manager? I'm going to have an honest moment here. I struggle with this. I have a little bit of OCD. I think it's funny that people who struggle with OCD, it's like the only disorder that like they're proud of. But I struggle with OCD, and that really shapes how I view my things. Because like I care so much, like I don't want to scratch on it. I don't want it to be misused. It's got an intended purpose and no one mess with it. And so I tend to look at these things like I own them, like they're mine. They're for me to consume. Now my wife, doesn't have this problem at all. And she has just a much more healthy approach to our stuff because she views it as a manager. She's like, yeah, you want to borrow it? Take it. And I'm like, no, like, you can't. No one can use my stuff. You need to start thinking about your stuff critically. Look at it and ask yourself, do you view it as an owner or do you view it as a manager? Second piece is to start looking at your finances carefully. Next week, we're going to wrap up this series, and we're going to talk about how we make decisions on what we give to. And if we're going to keep in line with this thought, that we're going to say that generosity is premeditated, that it is calculated, that it is designated. The truth is, we need to get to a point where we see our finances carefully, that we know where our money is going. And for a lot of us, this is not a reality. Like, money comes in, money goes out. Few of us operate our lives on a budget. And so I just want to give you some tools. First, Dave Ramsey, if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, he's just great stuff. We do Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University, and we have one wrapping up in a couple weeks. And so the next time it comes around, I really encourage you to be a part of it. My wife and I went through that a few years ago, and it really helped us develop a lifestyle of generosity. But Dave has a tool that will help us put together budgets, and that tool's available at everydollar.com. And so you can go there. If you're like an app person, you can download an app. You can do it all on the app, or you can download a budget worksheet. If you can't remember everydollar.com, go to Google and type in budget worksheet. Just type that in, download that, and sit down this week and to begin to process through your finances, to think about them carefully. And I promise you, even if you do nothing with what we talk about next week, your life will be better because you've taken control of your finances. So 2 things. Can you put that back up one more time, please? Start thinking about your stuff critically and start looking at your finances carefully. I mentioned next week as we wrap up this series, we'll be able to give you guys the tools to make decisions on who and what you're generous towards. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for your son and for the lessons that he gives and for the perspective for so many of us that life isn't about ownership, that we are managers of all the resources that we've been given. So God, I pray that we would have the strength and the boldness to step off of this insane cycle and entrust what you call us to, that the generous life is truly the better life. God, I pray that we would look at our items, we look at our things critically, and we look at our finances carefully. We would be open to the things you ignite our hearts to and the things that you want us to be generous towards. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.